I don't know what Discord executives schemed this bad boy up, but Discord is working on parental controls in their in-development family center. Yes, Discord and family, two words that never go together. So your parents make a Discord account, and any single mother has to also send me a DM. It's required, but they go to this little family tab, and then they need to scan a QR code on your account. And first off, let me just say there's a big issue here. If your parents are like mine and they're afraid of the smart part of their smart TV, then there's no way in heck your parents are going to know that this thing exists. And once your parents actually scan the QR code, you as the child get a request to accept them as a parent. And thankfully it's not the other way around, because my mom would never accept me as her child. And one thing to point out is that I am excited for the new wave of scams that are going to pop up, because there's yet another QR code in Discord. Thankfully Discord does say only allow your parents to see this QR code. But I'm going to be honest, scammers are going to convince the dumbest kid on the planet to accept the scammer as their parent. So what happens when you give your parent access to your Discord account? Well, you're in for quite the show, to be completely
Add a little twist to your routine. Lemon collagen peptides, vital proteins.
The phone plans the internet is obsessing over just got better. Telemobile's new price drop put
Completely honest. When you have a parent looking at your Discord account, they get to see the usernames of people that you add and send a direct message to. Now, of course, anyone with 2 brain cells can understand that this is a bad idea. And on the Discord app subreddit, filled with the most amount of people that have less than 2 IQ, there's actually a comment of someone explaining the issue. I really don't want to explain why I'm DMing _monster_X. Yes, your friend's funny name could be the difference between you being on Discord and your helicopter parents annihilating your access to the internet. Now, rewinding a bit, the whole point of this is to make sure that your parents know you're not talking to a creep. But here's the thing, creeps on Discord don't have the name Totally Not a Creep and the weirdest profile picture on the planet. They blend in just like one of Timmy's other friends. Now, next up, your parents can see the names of the servers that you join and participate in, so sending a message. And to be honest, I cannot wait to ruin people's access to the internet by making a server, calling it a free Robux generator, and once enough people join the server, I'm going to change the name to Communism Teen Brainwashing, just to scare all those really paranoid parents. Now, I'm going to be honest, seeing what server someone is in
Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffreys video. In this video, I'm going to be repairing and upgrading this iMac that was donated to me by a viewer. It was described as having a graphics card fault but was still turning on. I knew nothing else about the computer other than that. After receiving it, it looks to be in good condition other than the obvious display issue. It does have some grime around the ports and power button area, but I should be able to take care of that. Along with the iMac came an Apple keyboard, mouse, and trackpad. The viewer, who wished to remain anonymous, also had a few other broken Apple devices, including 2 Mac Pro towers. As they lived in Western Australia, I couldn't pick them up, so I struck a deal with my mate Nathan. If he could pick up the stuff, he could keep the Mac Pros and anything else if he posted that iMac to me. He was in, and I received the iMac as well as 2 other boxes of miscellaneous items, some of which Nathan threw in. Included was 2 Wacom tablets, a headphone stand, hard drive enclosure, router, Nexus tablet, peripherals, and some zip disks. Plugging in the iMac, we can diagnose it further. While I cannot make out 98% of the display, I can still see the cursor and time at the top of the display. To me, it doesn't look like a graphics card has failed, but the display panel itself. To test my theory, I'll attach a monitor to the iMac. I picked up this Thunderbolt display recently and decided to test it out on this iMac. Sure enough, I was right. The external monitor displays correctly, indicating the graphics card is working. And I also know my new monitor works, although it has its own issues I need to take care of. Along with the repairs, I'll also be upgrading this computer with an SSD, an extra few sticks of memory, and an Intel Core i7. It's time we got inside the iMac, and to do that, all I need to do is lift up on the display glass. This is the very last iMac model that opens this way. All the newer, thinner models have their display glued in place. Under the glass is the LCD itself. It's held in place with 8 screws that need to come out before we can access any of the internals. We'll also need to disconnect 4 cables running to the display before it can be detached from the iMac. The internal design of this iMac not only looks nice, but it's modular and upgradable, something kept through the entire lineup of Intel iMacs. Although you can forget about any of that upgradability with the new M1 iMac. This particular model can have its CPU, GPU, RAM, hard drive, Wi-Fi card, and DVD drive upgraded. Before jumping to conclusions about the display, I wanted to try a new display cable. It's possible someone opened up the computer and damaged this cable. After all, it's looking a bit creased. I didn't have a direct replacement, but an extension cable that will do the job. A replacement cable will be a lot cheaper than having to change the whole screen. The black tape from the display will need to be peeled back in order to reveal the connector. After attaching the test cable, the display can be connected back onto the computer for testing. After powering on the computer, you can see the display exhibits the same issues as before. With the cable not the culprit, I'll need to replace the whole display. $108 later, I had a used one. There was no images of it turned on, and with only one poor photo of it, I didn't really have any idea on what condition it was in. Pulling it out, it looks great with no scratches. It even came with its mounting hardware and cabling, so it'll be a direct replacement. I'll test fit the screen to make sure it and the iMac is working before proceeding to complete any of the upgrades. Firing up the iMac, you can see it now displays the correct image and we can actually see what's going on the computer. From here, I'm going to remove the screen we just attached and begin upgrading the iMac. I'll start by removing the logic board first so we can upgrade the CPU, but also replace the thermal paste for both the CPU and GPU modules. To get the logic board out, I'll firstly remove the RAM door and the RAM modules themselves. Next, the DVD drive is to come out. It's secured with 4 screws and 2 cables, one of which is a temperature sensor. This iMac has many of them, and if one is absent, it can cause the fans to spin at full speed all the time. So it's important to keep them intact and reconnect them when we reassemble the device. After the right fan is detached, all of the cables connecting to the logic board can be unplugged. Not all of them disconnect in the same way, so it's important not to force any, as you could break off their socket from the board and no longer be able to attach the cable back. After everything's disconnected, we'll need to take out the infrared module that sits behind the Apple logo. The last thing left to detach is the 3 cables going to the Wi-Fi card. Now it's time to remove the power supply. It's completely exposed, unlike many other desktop computers, so one wrong move and you could electrocute yourself if the computer is still plugged in or the mains capacitor is still holding a charge, so always proceed with caution. After removing the 4 screws, both the output and mains input wires will need to come out before the board is free. Proceeding, we can now remove the 7 Torx screws holding the logic board in place. The main board sits behind the front chin, so it'll need to be worked loose before it can be lifted partway out. There is still several cables for power, the hard drive, and optical drive still attached to the other side.
Full Sail University is where you can get hands-on experience with emerging technologies. Whether you're on campus or online, we offer degrees.
Now we can get a good look at the logic board. There are 3 SATA ports, labelled HDD, ODD, and SSD. Models configured with an SSD also supported a second hard drive. That's why there are 3 SATA ports. Although mine didn't ship with an SSD or have 2 drives from the factory, the port is still present, and with the right cable, it can be used. Now we can focus on upgrading the CPU. To get at it, the heatsink needs to come off. The 4 screws that surround the CPU socket attach to another set of 4 on the other side. To get them out, you need to hold the adjacent screw while loosening, similar to if there was a nut on the back. With the heatsink removed, the old thermal compound can be removed from the copper heat pad. This is also a good time to clean out the heatsink fins, although mine were completely spotless. With that, it's time for our new CPU. I'll be installing the fastest supported in this machine, the Intel Core i7-2600S. I purchased it used and it shows. There is thermal paste on the underside covering some pads and components. I want to remove all these prior to installing the CPU, otherwise it might not work at all. Using a tissue and a brush, I was able to remove the mess. It's now time to remove the Intel Core i5-2400S. I'll wipe off the thermal paste prior to removing it, just so I don't make a mess. After unlatching the lever, the old CPU can be removed and replaced with the Core i7. I'll now apply some thermal paste as outlined in the official guide. With that, all that we need to do to complete this CPU upgrade is to reattach the heatsink. I will loosely attach all screws before tightening them down. This is to prevent uneven pressure on the CPU, which could cause damage. After it's attached, I'll reconnect its sensor cable and proceed to the GPU. It can also be upgraded, but is a costly upgrade at around $200. So instead, I'll just be replacing its thermal paste to help keep it running. Its heatsink attaches in the same way as the other did. The card itself needs to be removed, otherwise the screws just spin freely and don't come out. With the heatsink properly removed, we can get a good look at our graphics card. This is the AMD Radeon 6750M. I'll remove the dry, crusty paste from the GPU die before applying a dot of new paste. Before we can attach the heatsink though, we'll need to remove the old thermal paste from it as well. Once that's been done, the two can be reattached together. With that, the graphics card can be reattached to the logic board and fastened with its 3 screws and 1 sensor cable. Before I get that logic board back into position, I want to clean out the remainder of the fans inside the iMac. There are 2 left inside the housing that are secured in place with Torx screws. After I get them out, I'll be able to clean them with a brush to remove any dust and debris inside. There was minimal dust for a computer of this age, and certainly less than what I found in my last iMac. It was so clogged that I was surprised the fans even span. After all 3 fans inside the iMac have been cleaned, it's time for reassembly. 2 of the 3 fans will need to be put back into place before I can install the logic board. The lower left fan has a few cables that clip onto it, so it's important that they're properly cable managed before it's screwed into place. Now I can install the logic board. It's a bit difficult to connect the cables that attach to the rear as they're quite short. However, once they're attached, the board can be positioned back into place. Be sure not to trap any cables below the board, as not only will you not be able to attach them, but they could get damaged if they get jammed in the wrong place. I will reattach all of the screws prior to connecting the flex cables that attach to the board. I am very tempted to pick up a 2019 iMac and completely spec it out. Put a large SSD in it, max out the RAM and CPU. It would be costly and a bit more nerve-wracking as the display is glued in place, but once it's open, it wouldn't be any harder than this one. It's time for the right-hand fan to be reinstalled. After attaching its flex cable, it can be positioned into place and fastened with its 1 screw. After the antenna wires for the Wi-Fi card are attached, the power supply is to go in next. After its cables have been plugged in, I can reinstall the 4 screws. Before reinstalling the DVD drive, I'll need to remove the hard drive. This will just give us access for the temperature sensor wire to be able to be routed through to where it needs to connect to the logic board. I won't reinstall this hard drive as we'll be upgrading it with an SSD later. After attaching the DVD drive with its 4 screws, its temperature sensor wire can be connected into place.
Jess wanted to start a business.
Jess, you need to sell those.
And then this happened.
Oh my gosh, I just made my first
As for that hard drive we removed earlier, I'm going to remove its mounting hardware, as this will need to be transferred to our new SSD. However, to mount it to the SSD, we'll need an adapter, as the SSD is smaller than the original hard drive. After the mounting gear is attached, we can install the SSD into the bracket. It can then be reinstalled into the iMac using its 2 cables and 2 fastening screws. Just like that, we've updated this computer from a mechanical hard drive to a much faster SSD. Before we seal things up, I'm going to replace the CMOS battery just for good measure. After that's done, it's time to install our new working display panel into place. After attaching all 4 wires, we can carefully seat it down into position and install the 8 Torx screws. As we're installing glass over the top, it's important to remove any dust, fingerprints, or marks from the LCD panel itself before we attach it. Otherwise, it'll be trapped in between the 2 layers. After that's done, I could reattach the glass panel back into place. The last upgrade left is the RAM. I'll reinstall the original 4 gigs of RAM and add 2 additional 2 GB sticks, bringing the total to 8 gigs. It can support up to 32 GB, but I had this RAM laying around and 8 GB should be enough. After installing the RAM door, it's time to test the computer. I'll also need to install an operating system on our new SSD. Thankfully, the computer is working flawlessly after the repairs and upgrades. Now, all that's left to do is give the computer a good clean. Starting with the display, I'll wipe it down with a microfiber cloth and some alcohol before cleaning the rest of the computer with some alcohol wipes. It's always good practice to clean used electronics. This one didn't look too bad, but just after a light scrub, you can see the amount of dirt that came off. There was also a sticker in the top left-hand corner, likely from some kind of asset tag, as this might have been used in a workplace or school at some point in its life. After cleaning that off, all that was left was the keyboard and mouse itself. After everything's cleaned off, we're done. So this is it, a 2011 iMac I received for free. After a new LCD and an upgrade to an SSD, an i7 CPU, and 8 gigs of RAM, we have a nice little desktop with a great design that hasn't dated at all. My dad still uses a 2010 model of this iMac. It's had a suspected power supply fault ever since it was new that sometimes causes it not to boot after the power button is pressed. Instead, it just makes water droplet sounds for a few minutes until eventually kicking into gear and chiming. But given just how easy this one was to fix, I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8 GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8 GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8 GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge... I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge... I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra. And on that note, this has been a huge... I'll have to get his working better than it ever has. As for this iMac, what we're left with is a 2011 model with a 2.8 GHz Core i7 processor, 8GB of RAM, and an AMD Radeon 6750M graphics card running macOS High Sierra.
You want to be a software engineer, right? Go to elgocademy.com. Pick a question. Read the statement.
This is the last bolt. And we should be good to... Okay, there we go. I find out what is wrong with this car. Now, this isn't just any project car. I got the chance to buy my ultimate dream car, a McLaren P1, for a fraction of its original price, with one big catch. It got caught in a massive flood from a 140-mile-an-hour hurricane that made landfall. Although its price was eye-watering, I put everything on the line to buy it because, after all, it was a hypercar with only 300 miles on the clock. And I know that because I looked up its history on Car Vertical. Car Vertical gives you the most... Just had an history, and you find to the link in my video description to get from less water in it, and I have not cleaned anything out, so there's still going to be a lot of water in it. Yep, that's flood water. Yummy. That's good. That's good, isn't it, Jack?
That looks like chocolate milk.
It doesn't taste like chocolate milk. It certainly doesn't smell like chocolate milk. But we do have like a bunch of straps in here, so that's cool. We have, ooh, it's an emergency. Is this a road flare or just a little? I don't know what this is. I think this might be for fitted luggage or something. Yeah, so this connects here, and ooh, that's squishy. So that's a car. Ow, that's a carpet. There's not a lot of room in these hypercars, you know. They don't make them for practicality. This is affixed with a bunch of little Torx. And what's interesting here is something I found just now. Come a little closer. So this is for firefighters. You see a little fireman's hat right there? This is emergency personnel. To help avoid personal injury in an emergency, turn ignition off, cut the HVIL cut loop in the two positions indicated. Okay, these are these two things. And cut the 12-volt battery return in the two positions indicated. So here's the thing. In order to cut these two things, you got to take off like 12 screws. So imagine this. The car is on fire, okay? You have to get into here for the firemen to break through here and then cut two little things so the car won't be more on fire. So we take one of these off and...
Where'd that go?
We're not We're not getting that back. Check that out. Ooh, oh boy. That's, you think that's good? You think that battery's good?
Maybe, right?
That's okay, so this is a lithium battery that comes in all McLarens, and this is about $3,500. That's the 12-volt battery that runs all the car stuff. And if you look up here, this nice tray, this has a little bit of debris in it. It's a little bit of corrosion on absolutely everything because this car was underwater. Now, what I'm gonna do is I think we should take a vacuum out and take out all this sand.
Yeah, of course.
Because there's sand and broken glass, and there's amoebas in here that I've been touching, and now I'm either gonna get superpowers or super cancer. You know what I really wanna do? I wanna take off this battery, and I wanna put it on my McLaren charger, and I wanna see if it takes a charge.
I'm thinking it might.
You're thinking it might? You're thinking that battery's not completely shorted out?
It could be.
It's a lithium battery.
A fuse could have popped first, right? It's got a pyro switch.
Okay.
You're good at that.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. Most detailers will tell you not to put this on paint, but I feel like on this car it doesn't really matter, you know? Like, you gotta really get into all the nooks and crannies. I feel like this is also probably a situation that most hypercar owners don't get into much, you know? Taking all the sand out of their filters. I mean, just look at this. Oh boy. Tell you what, this wet dry vac is doing wonders. But with our wet dry vac 3000, I mean, that looks brand new. Don't look at that. Yeah, no. It doesn't look brand new. See, the sand is one thing, but what they don't tell you about is the broken glass that's everywhere. See, anybody that's ever taken out broken glass from a car will know that it's there for the next 10 years. Whoa. Oh, look at that. Hey. That is satisfying.
It's like new car.
Dude, that's brand new. This car only had 300 miles on it. Can you believe that? Dude, she cleans up real nice. Look at that. Put this in the showroom tomorrow.
Like it never happened.
Like it never happened. Only slightly damp, you know?
Yeah.
We put this out in the sun, she's good to go.
Just throw some rice on it.
We should throw this entire car into a bag of rice. Look at all that carbon. It spared no expense. See if this comes off. All right.
Everything's breaking free really nicely.
Yeah, it's not bad at all.
How long does this car sit for, do you think?
I mean, in the water or?
Like afterwards?
It's not for like 3 months. But the waters are seeded pretty quickly. All right, I don't know how to take this off.
It's like a ratchet strap. Just there should be like a little safety.
I think it's this.
There it is.
Okay, and you just what?
Pull up on it. With it all the way up.
Do a loop-de-loop and pull, and your shoes are looking cool. So one thing that is really cool about McLarens is that they use bolt heads that are smaller than they traditionally would be on any other car for weight savings. Now you'd think, how much would, a bolt head weigh? But if you do it all over the car, it actually gives you a few pounds, and you don't really notice it. So a bolt that would usually be like a 10 millimeter head, it's an 8, and one that's an 8, it's a 7, and so on and so forth. But that's one thing I like about the McLarens. They did that on the 650S, 675 LT. I think the original MP412C didn't have that, but then they started getting a little bit more wise to weight savings and seeing how they could cheat.
I wonder what the actual weight savings is on that. Like, would it be like a significant amount? Like,
I think it's probably a few pounds, but
like maybe even 20, like 20 pounds?
Maybe. I mean, it's probably like if you wore socks that day, if you're free balling it, if you're going commando one day, I think, that's the same weight savings that you get from making all the bolts one size smaller. And the good thing about this is like it's a big battery, but it doesn't weigh anything. So
Nice.
yeah, there's no corrosion on this battery. Now I don't know if there's actually water in here. Let's see if there's any juice in this thing.
Landsweeper automatically discovers and identifies any asset in your environment. Depending on the asset types found, we retrieve.
Dude.
We have 1 point something volts.
Heck yeah.
So maybe there's something in there. All right, let's get this cleaned up and we'll put it on a charger, and then we'll clean this all up. And actually, you know what? We got the fuse box right here.
Let's check that.
And
oh,
okay. So that fuse box is probably no good. This is the fuse box from my 675 LT, the original one before I had it replaced. And this is the fuse box for the McLaren P1. There are slight differences, but they are essentially identical. So in this one, we had a pyro fuse, which is a fuse that if the car gets into an accident or something, it has a little charge that basically disconnects the power from the rest of the car. This one does not have that. It just has this 250 amp fuse, and we're going to test if this one is still good. Is it? I'm going to see if this one's... Yep.
sweet.
Fuse is still good. It's just it's a little bit corroded on this side, but you can still see that the connection is good on this side. Slight bit of corrosion, but nothing to write home about. I will replace this, but knowing that it still works as a fuse, that's good. Also, right here, you can see that there's an extra 30 amp fuse. I'm wondering if this is for the like a relay or something for the hybrid system, because this doesn't have it. I don't think this is good because you can see how much corrosion there is on here. Now, these are not expensive things to replace, so I'll replace all of them. I'll probably replace the fuse box, but knowing that we can save money and it's not like a hypercar thing to get these situated, that's some good news. Now, this does have some corrosion, but that is to be expected because none of this is weather sealed. So this is just straight copper and it went into salt water. So this is exactly what happens. It just gets super rusted. It looks like it's at the bottom of the sea, and that's basically where it was. But all the other connections that were weather sealed, they all look fine. So hopefully we just have to replace the connections that weren't weather sealed, and then maybe the car will run. Okay, this may be a very, very, very stupid idea, but we have my McLaren lithium charger here and a McLaren lithium battery. This may have water in it. Let's see what happens. So, gonna say anything? What if we put a battery charger on this and then like try to see if it charges a little bit?
Is it okay with lithium to do that? Lithium batteries, put a charger?
This car was underwater.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not okay for anything we're doing right now. So, and we will see if 1.3 volts. Can we put a charge to it? I will turn it off if it starts doing weird stuff. It says sulfate. So, if it's sulfated, that means that there's probably a lot of resistance in between the cells in a regular battery. And this will recondition it. However, that's a lithium battery, and I don't know if it works the same way. That may just have water in it, and I think it does. So, rather than trying to put more energy in this, where it's probably a broken system and the board is screwed up, I think we should probably leave that alone.
I'm down for that. I don't want acid on my face.
You're not going to have acid on your face. You're going to have an electrical fire you can't put out. We'll put that to the side, clean up the car, and then see what else there is to do.
New discoveries, yay.
You know what we should do? We should go underneath the car.
Let's do that.
So before we do anything, since this is a hybrid car, there is a battery disconnect right here. And we don't want to get electrocuted, because even though this car's been sitting and also underwater, you never know what happened with the batteries. Now, this is pretty corroded, so that bodes well for what the battery's like underneath. Huh. That is interesting.
It's got like a safety slide. You slide it to the side. Or you just pull that.
I think you just pull this. Okay. Nope, there we go.
Well, we didn't spontaneously combust.
Nope.
We are good.
Yep. So take a look at that.
Ooh.
That's good. I think this battery's fine, dude.
That's the worst we've seen so far, though.
Yeah.
Like, out of everything, like, how does the inside of that look again?